Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's online event featuring a knowledgeable subject matter expert today who's going to be speaking on immigrant and refugee services for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression identity diverse newcomers. Before we begin today's event, we would like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHIO in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them in this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Now, this is a topic we did a quick poll to our members on in our last newsletter, and we asked, within your role, have you worked with an LGBTQI+ refugee who moved to Canada due to persecution towards their SOGIE? Of the 23 responses we received, 20 or 87% said yes, they have, or that they've worked with a family member that worries for a relative identifying as LGBTQI+. So many of you here today may likely relate to the work we're presenting today and the topic we're covering. And also in honor of Pride Month, we're very excited to be hosting this presentation. My name is Andrew Tomeyer. I go by the pronouns he, him, and I'm the education coordinator with N4. I will be hosting and moderating today's webinar presentation. My co-host is Mariah Maddock, who will be monitoring the Q&A box today. I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speaker, Kelly Ernst. Kelly Ernst, PhD, is the Vice President of Vulnerable Populations at the Center for Newcomers in Calgary, Alberta. He has a PhD in educational psychology. Kelly has created numerous projects at the Center for Newcomers. In his spare time, he's co-founder and president of the End of the Rainbow Foundation. He was also a co-founder of a number of not-for-profit organizations. He's a winner of the 2020 Stars of Alberta Volunteer Award for his lifelong volunteering. And as a human rights and civil liberties advocate, he was a recipient of the Alberta Civil Liberties Human Rights Award for his work on Alberta's Bill 10 as chairperson of the Public Consultation of Gay-Straight Alliances in Alberta schools. He sits on committees nationally and locally advocating for many vulnerable people. Welcome, Kelly. We'll be recording today's session and it will be uploaded to N4 within the next week or so. We'll share this with you as soon as it becomes available. Along with that, we'll be providing resources as well. Should there be any technical issues during this webinar, we'll inform you with details of an alternate makeup session. Now, before we begin today's event, I would like to take a moment to introduce you to our platform features to help enhance your participation experience. Throughout today's session, we invite you to write your question in the Q&A window. We know that sometimes many of you might have the same question or be interested in a particular response. Today, you have the option of upvoting a question. Please upvote questions you're interested in hearing the answer to, and we'll prioritize which questions we pose to Kelly first. Our speaker today has no conflicts of interest to declare. And with that said, I will pass the virtual podium over to Kelly. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate the introduction. And yes, please come up with your questions as I go through my presentation. And I'm happy to answer anything. I'll just start before I share my screen, letting people know I am calling from Mohkinstsis, also known as Calgary, and we are on the Treaty 7 lands of the Blackfoot Nations, so have a number of nations that are represented in that, including Siksika, Tsuut'ina, Pukine, and Kanai. So, and the nations associated with the Métis Nations, Métis Nation 3 as well. So I'm going to share my screen. So what I'm hoping to go over today is, very often we don't think that, small LGBT programs can teach us anything, but actually that's just not the case. And so what I want to do is go over our projects here in Calgary that have done exactly the opposite, have taught people something that they could be doing in their own cities, and certainly we've built on that here in Calgary. So what we started a few years ago was a very small project to address LGBT and SOGIESC Newcomers. Just as a little footnote, throughout the presentation, I'm going to be using LGBTQ2S and SOGIESC as interchangeable. So you'll probably hear me say both. And when I say SOGIESC, I'm referring to all of the diverse sexual orientation and gender identities and expressions and sexual characteristics that we all see in our organizations. So our project was very small when we started. We only had a handful of clients, very vulnerable clients though, and we had 2 people addressing that. Over time, it grew substantially. So recently, by the end of this month, we're going to have a whole vulnerable services team that includes LGBT services, and we'll be addressing people's needs with over 35 staff and practicum students and volunteers. So it's really exploded. And part of the reason it's exploded is because of COVID. Our learnings as well have been in 3 large areas, and we've had requests nationally to give information to organizations about what we're doing. And one of the big things that we're doing is creating national LGBT guidelines about SOGIESC services. And we're working with 40 different organizations from Vancouver to Halifax to do that. We're also working with case management processes and making sure that the case management processes that we've developed are able to not only address LGBT people, but also vulnerable people as well. And the other thing that we had to do, especially with COVID, is when it arose, we had a very small microloan program to address issues, and I will talk about that in a minute. But that exploded over the COVID period and has been highly successful. I'll get to that. So as you know, there's a worldwide refugee problem. It is projected that within the next couple of years, there's going to be 100 million refugees worldwide, both internally displaced and those in 3rd countries. So we've seen that just like everywhere else in Canada, and had to address that. And there's 3 basic ways that we've had to address that. So, you know, we've seen a wave of immigration through common economic and family class immigrants. But for the LGBT and SOGIE people, very often this type of class is not common, or you see this type of class very infrequently. And part of the reason for that is the people that are able to come through these classes are not vulnerable necessarily. They have a lot of resources, a lot of maybe finances. They may have connections when they arrive in the country. So they're in least need of services. And so we see low client numbers in those areas. We also see convention refugees. So we actually started a project here in Calgary, and we partnered with the Rainbow Wrap projects across Canada, including Rainbow Refugee, to create the Calgary Rainbow Railroad Station. And those convention refugees or sponsored refugees, we're trying to bring to our area through various different programs, but through sponsorship groups primarily. So again, those particular number of people is fairly low, although an important part of what we're doing. This is an area where the media often gets a hold of, and you'll see sponsored refugees in the media very often, as opposed to the other classes or the next group that I'm going to be talking about, and that's the inland refugee claimants. So these are the people that have arrived to Canada through airports or walking over the border. And this is a really important class for everyone to understand, because very, very often the LGBT people that we see are an inland claimants. They've arrived to Canada, got here somehow. They cannot get back to their country of origin and don't want to go back because it's so incredibly unsafe, and the persecution that they've faced is pretty significant. And I'll show you some data on that as well. The other thing is that over the last couple of years, the number of people walking over the border, as we know, this has been one of the ways that people have been getting to Canada from the United States. This is not completely subsided with COVID. And we don't anticipate that this is going to end either. So this is an area that if you're working in settlement or working with LGBT claimants, you'll need to learn more about this particular area. A really critical piece of that is that when people go to their Immigration and Review Board hearings, they pretty much have to identify how they can prove their sexual orientation or gender identity. And although the IRB says that they don't have to prove, in our experience, if there isn't some sort of evidence put forward, the likelihood of them succeeding their IRB hearings are fairly low. So where we see people coming from is mostly through the countries that criminalize being LGBT or have very weak rule of law. So as people may know, there are a lot of countries in the world that where LGBT people are criminalized, including the death penalty. So, but this just gives you a quick snapshot of where we see people coming from. So it's a really diverse group of people. Those countries that criminalize being LGBT, it's about 70 in the world. Because of that, the types of issues that we see are along these lines. So we see very often people that have had death threats or had threats of violence and torture or experienced that violence and torture. And so there are also a large group of people that have experienced some imprisonment or have impending imprisonment if they go back to their country of origin. And unfortunately, we see a lot of people that are victims of family honor crimes and violence. So if you look at them overall, almost all of the clients that we see in terms of LGBT people are trying to avoid some sort of persecution, or if they're here in some other means, have avoided persecution by immigrating or coming to Canada in some other means. So what we did to address all of these issues is we created a whole wraparound set of services. So at the Center for Newcomers, we created a case management and settlement services dedicated toward SOGIE people. And it provides a wide range of professional services. So your common settlement services that you would see in any settlement organization. It includes language and career and cultural development. But we also provide mental health supports, lots of referrals to other organizations, and so on. We also provide education to other organizations about SOGIE people, so that when we refer people to other services, the services that they're going to are far more accepting of the referral people that we're giving. The other thing that we're doing is, because we are working so much with the IRB and working with claimants so much, is we created sexual orientation and gender identity expression settlement needs and risk assessment. And what this risk assessment did is it accomplished a number of things at once. Is we needed to get a really good handle of what people's stories were, so that we could address their immediate settlement needs, but also assess the risks that they were facing both here in Canada and in their country of origin. Very often people in their country of origin are facing similar risks, and because of the communication between them and people in their country of origin, that has to be handled really well so that other people are not being placed at risk needlessly through our work. The other thing, because we're working so closely with the IRB, we use the interview process to walk people through their stories so that they could also examine and point toward evidence that might arise for their IRB case. And this has proven to be really helpful. The lawyers love us as a result, because very often the lawyers and legal people do not have the trust with the LGBT clients that we do, and they aren't able to find the evidence that they actually need for their case. As I mentioned, we also have educational services, so a wide range of different types of education so that we can better work with our partners. The other thing that we did is we created a new organization called the End of the Rainbow Foundation, and we housed within it the Calgary Rainbow Railroad Station. And part of the reason that we did that and did not do it through the Center for Newcomers is because IRCC funding does not allow us to work with refugee claimants. We needed a different place so that we could work with a different organization to provide services to refugee claimants. At the time, there was no organization in our city that was able to do that. So we had to create that through creating a new organization, setting up funding for it, and primarily it's all done through volunteers. So the sponsorship circles, of course, are done through volunteers, but also a number of other services, from everything from support groups to language tutoring and mentorship, are all done through volunteers through the End of the Rainbow Foundation. That way it doesn't put Center for Newcomers at risk with respect to their IRCC funding, but it also ensures that all of the clients that come forward to us all get services. We don't have to send anybody away. I just want to touch base on the SOGIE needs assessment a little bit more. I want people to understand that there are guidelines out there, both Canadian and UN guidelines, when working with SOGIE people and doing interviews with SOGIE people. So those Canadian IRB guidelines have been recently revised, but they're a good base to be working from if you want to understand more about working with LGBT newcomers. As I said, the purpose of this assessment was to assess service and settlement needs and look at risk and also identify evidence as we go through it. The process isn't a one-time meeting, and this is really important. Very often you may get SOGIE people coming to you and saying, I'm going through an IRB process and I need a letter for my hearing. And one of the things that we don't do is we don't meet with a person once or just over the phone and provide a letter. That actually puts them at risk because the credibility of that letter may actually undermine their entire case. So the whole process of the assessment takes multiple meetings. We get to know each person that comes forward so that we're confident that we can address issues of credibility. As you probably know, the IRB takes credibility as their number one issue, and they are zeroing in on credibility of any case. And if they do not find a person credible, they will reject their asylum claim. So we don't want to go there. So we do understand that some people are not credible when they're claiming to be LGBT, and so we do reject some people with respect to being witnesses at hearings or writing letters based on that. When we do that, we don't reject services for them though. So we'll continue to provide services, but we are honest with them that we can't provide various supports, based on what they're saying. So the other thing that we do because of this whole process is we are able to question in such a way that the questions that they'll receive at the IRB are very similar than what they've already seen at our organization. So it's a good, almost a mock hearing process by the time they're through the whole needs assessment, so that they're well prepared for their IRB hearing when they get there. If we do end the whole process with a written summary, we do recommend to the client ways that they can mitigate any risks that they may be facing, but also we also touch on the credibility directly, so that lawyers and the client understand that we take this 100% seriously. We've attended many people at their hearings as witnesses, and that is also a service people can provide that is extremely helpful to LGBT claimants. So when we go there and provide this type of services, our success rate, and this is now a year old, this needs to be revised, is now 98% successful. So the people that come to us and go to the IRB, 98% of them will have got through their hearing successfully and been accepted as convention refugees. That is different than what you would see as the overall acceptance rate before COVID started. So before COVID started, the IRB overall rate of acceptance was very low, and as low as 47% when people were walking over the border. So this is really important for people to understand, because support through that whole IRB process actually mitigates a lot of risk for LGBT clients. And if you think about it for a minute, even the difference between that 55 and 96%, that 41% difference, those are people that are very often truly LGBT, truly facing risks. They simply didn't have the evidence to support themselves, and they're being pushed back to their countries of origin where they're facing persecution. So that is a horrendous type of case, and we do everything that we can to try to avoid that. So what we tried to do first is to replicate the guidelines in our services across the country. So we applied to IRCC to say, hey, look, we think we have a successful approach here. We have people coming to us wanting to learn more. So why don't we document this through a guideline project so that we can share this with other people in Canada. So we did that. So we're calling it the National SOGIESC Guideline Project. It's underway right now. Some of you may be involved with it already. The whole idea was to go beyond mere training sensitivity around SOGIE and LGBT issues, but to really zero in and focus on how do you work with LGBT newcomers so that organizations can live and breathe supporting people as they come to Canada. So far, we've done a lot of work in this area, and we're going to be having 2 conferences, one at the end of this year and one in a couple of years from now. But some of the guidelines that we have already started with were actually recommended at a conference, 2 conferences actually, ending a couple of years ago in 2018. So this whole project is building upon past work. It's not something that's new, and it's using the expertise of organizations from across Canada to build these guidelines. So the guidelines themselves are going to be in a number of broad areas. So these broad areas include the settlement interviews, which I've touched upon, but also the sponsorship circles that are popping up all over Canada to bring sponsored refugees to different cities. A lot of projects and organizations also across Canada offer support groups to LGBT people. And so the guidelines will touch on those areas as well. So hopefully helping people to set up support groups that are effective. The other thing that we're hoping to do is touch base on a whole bunch of organizational policies. So ethics and trauma issues, so that we're better able to support people, but also be better able to help them integrate into the local organization. So for example, one of the really key issues within the guidelines project right now are Indigenous issues. So, you know, how do we introduce newcomers that are LGBT to Two-Spirit people across Canada, and the history and the treaty system and so on and so forth. So that's become a really big issue in the guidelines project. So we'll have core concepts that are mostly organizational, but also program-specific concepts that we'll be able to touch base on. The second applied work that we were able to do is to use our case management approach to apply that to vulnerable populations. And this became particularly important during the COVID period, although we had already started applying our case management approach to vulnerable populations. But when COVID hit, it truly exploded. The way that we do this is through ecological models that are roughly based on the social determinants of health. So we also, what we've done is we've embedded our case management approach within these types of models. And so we use, for example, the social determinants of health to examine a whole wide range of areas for particular clients. And we do that within a case management stage and activity kind of process. So right from intake and first meeting the person, we do an assessment based on the social determinants of health. We do service planning and plan what they're doing. And we even advocate using this particular model as well. So everything that we're doing with respect to case management centers around creating those individual goals for clients in this particular area. The nice thing about this is that it works for not only LGBT people, but we also use it and have learned to use this with vulnerable people more generally. So what we certainly noticed and what other organizations have noticed is that when refugees in particular come to us, they have experienced incredible trauma and similar types of persecution issues that I mentioned in the past. And so using a ecological model like this that looks at all areas of their life really helps to settle them more completely and fully. The other thing with respect to LGBT issues is making sure that they are feeling safe during the settlement process, and feeling safe in their community is incredibly important. So we specifically touch on, you know, how we're supporting their individual rights. Very often we're having to teach people their individual rights and what is acceptable and not acceptable in Canada, in our province. We're having to be really purposeful about those particular types of issues, because not all SOGIE people coming to Canada actually understand the rights that they actually have. And so they'll, even though they're in a new country, they've come here to flee persecution. They know it's better here. They don't know the specifics about how it's better here. So they may know that you can get married as an LGBT person here to your partner, but they may not know that abuse is unacceptable. So we've had cases where we've had to say, no, abuse is not acceptable in the community. You do not have to put up with it. And there's various processes that you can go through in the community to mitigate that for you or fight against that. Or it even goes into police beatings and what you can expect in terms of carding. All of those particular issues we've had to deal with. In terms of the other pieces of case management, it's embedded within the community of service providers that we have. So we don't make expectations that we're going to be doing all of the work, but instead we bring people in to do that work. And a final point I want to make here is we try to be as culturally competent as we can. So we try to do it in the language that the person has. If that means using translators and interpreters, we do that. But the way that we've hired our team is specifically oriented to understanding what languages we need to serve in, and then hiring specifically for those languages, for example, or hiring specifically for those particular cultures. The other thing that we do, because we're working so much with LGBT people, every single person that we bring in is fully aware that they're coming into an LGBT team. So whether or not they are LGBT or not, they have a full understanding of that and get training immediately as one of the first things, being a member of our team. In terms of competencies that we look for, I'm sort of getting into that already. Number one is we want that LGBT and culturally appropriate match to our client base. But the other things that we're really looking for is people that can really focus in on the social networking and interaction piece of it. So it's really that relationship development piece of it is something that's absolutely core. And so we're looking for connections within the community that people can bring in. So that is one of the competencies that we truly look for. The other types of things you'll see, you'll probably go, well, these are things that I try to look for in anybody that I hire. And that's absolutely true. But the other thing that we've noticed with working with vulnerable people is having to be highly adaptable and flexible and thinking outside of the box to try to get people services that they may not be able to get. I don't know about everybody's cities, but in terms of Calgary and working with IRCC funded organizations, very often we get the answer that, oh, well, you're a refugee claimant, or you're a humanitarian claim, or you're whatever in terms of your status, so you're not eligible for our services. And that has spilled over into non-IRCC funded organizations and has made a real mess. So we're constantly encouraging organizations, especially not those funded by IRCC, to provide services to people that are often seen as ineligible. So that flexibility and adaptability is really important for us. Our COVID response too created an explosion in our microloan program. And so I should let you know that when we started working with LGBT people or providing a dedicated service to LGBT people, it was very early on that we noticed that people were not being supported by income support and other means. And so we needed to provide a way to bridge people from the uncomfortable stage of when they arrive in Canada to when they do become eligible for income support. So we piloted a microloan project to bridge that a few months period where they didn't have those supports. So most of the people that are getting microloans are not accommodated through other government services. So most of the people that we're working with are in such dire straits as well that they're near homeless. As I said, we're trying to bridge people through that period, but when COVID came about, it truly exploded. So we went from about 60 clients to 300 immediately overnight that were accessing this type of service. The whole idea was to ensure that people got through the COVID period without losing their homes and staying within market housing and staying employed, or getting to the point of being employed. So if you think of the homeless first principle that you see in the homeless sector, this is more of an income first principle. So when we learned that so many refugee clients were not being covered by government programs, so the CERB and CERB originally, this is, why it exploded so quickly. We also matched or augmented our case management services with this diversion microloan idea. So our case managers are able to, we created assessments and trained case managers to ensure that they could do assessments to not only encourage self-sufficiency, but do an assessment of whether or not people are eligible for a microloan. So that became extremely useful through the COVID period. So rather than having to hire 20 more people to do case management, to do just the microloans, our hires were minimized as a result, and the need for additional case management was minimized. But it also allowed us to create a application process that made sense for people, and it encouraged people to become self-sufficient. So not everyone that applies for a microloan actually qualify. So, and when they don't qualify, then typically they don't qualify because they can be self-sufficient in other ways. So this slide, I wanted to show people just a little bit of data, and I have some more data coming. But when we did some evaluation of who was close to losing their home, so on the cusp of being homeless, you can see the two long bars there were people that have applied for asylum or were here as temporary foreign workers. And this is during the COVID period, okay? So those that were permanent resident, Canadian citizen, were the lowest need for needing assistance, and convention refugees and others were a little bit higher, but especially the people that were here as asylum seekers were at the most need. We also learned during COVID that people were being declined health services. So a lot of our LGBT people were coming to us saying, I'm trying to get health, but I can't get it. I need it. And COVID has just put a squeeze on who is getting services and who's not. So again, the people that were not getting health services were higher if they were applying for refugee status or temporary foreign workers or other statuses like humanitarian claims. And when you also contrasted that about against homes that were getting COVID, the homes that were newcomer homes were about 17% during that period of the last year, and whereas Canadians that have been here all of their lives, or most, or long enough to get their citizenship is only 2%. So those two pieces of information together were pretty profound for us. And why were they being declined? Well, were they being declined because of their immigration status? And what we found out was yes. So those, again, people that were asylum seekers, temporary foreign workers, and humanitarian claims were being declined specifically because of their humanitarian or their immigration status. So if you were permanent resident or Canadian or convention refugee, far less so. In terms of those loans, where did we provide loans and services? For a year of COVID, so that this needs to be updated because of course we're beyond a year now. But we provided 373 homes with microloans. It supported 950 people. And when you added in case management, over almost 1,400 people got case management or loan. The little map on the right shows you where in our city people got services. And you can see the circles where there were really high cluster areas. Those particular neighborhoods where you see the darkest blue dots are also where newcomers more than likely are living. So the highest proportion of newcomers and people of color live in those neighborhoods as opposed to the other areas of the city. We also did things like provided food hampers. So we gave more than 10,000 homes food hampers that were culturally specific. The interesting thing about when we did some analysis on these loans as well, the cost per person per night was only $12, just a little bit above. This is really important to understand because a lot of the programs that were created out there during the COVID period, for example, moving people to hotels or funding homeless shelters to expand during this period, their cost per person per night is far, far more. So we learned that it was far cheaper to actually keep people in their homes than to move them out of their homes into facilities settings. And this is one of the key things that we knew going into this from our LGBT services. So we knew working with the refugees, LGBT refugees, that if we kept them in market housing and in a home, that was way cheaper than actually moving people to shelters or moving them to hotels. So this is part of the reason we use this approach, is we knew that it had far greater flexibility for us in terms of providing services, but it was far, far cheaper from our learnings in the LGBT program. The other thing that we found in terms of using this approach and getting people to self-sustainability and using a case management approach to do this, so not giving everybody loans, is the employment rate during COVID, even during these peak times, actually increased in our group. We were actually able to encourage people to get employed while COVID peaks were happening. So among our client set, employment increased 253%. And homelessness, we were actually able to get people out of shelters. And so, when we worked with them, it dropped significantly. So the number of people that came to us that were already in shelters dropped by 94%. So there was literally only a handful of people by the end of the year that were still in shelters at the end of the service period. When we also take a look at the, how people are feeling in terms of this whole approach is we have really high percentages of people being satisfied, but also the economic impact associated with that is really high as well. So when we compare ourselves to other ways of providing services, as I said, the social return on investment is really high. So the minimum that we found was SROI of 4. So that means for every dollar that was put into our particular program, governments and donors saved $4 if compared to putting it elsewhere. And that increased to when, if you were using hotels to, house people in the COVID period. So this whole idea of, just move people to hotels is probably one of the most expensive ways to provide services and keep people safe and away from COVID. So I'm going to end there. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Andrew can tell me on that, but I am happy to answer questions now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tilly. That was great. The success that your organization has shown with improving the lives of immigrants and refugees, and just the significant work that you showed and the significant with the home loan, with the COVID home loans and such too, has been great. Even the food hampers, that was one of the reasons we originally reached out to CFN, was hearing about how Anila and the success of the food hampers program led to, even she got honored with one of the top Canadian Women of the Year earlier in 2021 too, which was amazing to see. But yeah, no, this has been a great discussion, and the work that you're doing has been great. And we have just a couple questions just before we wrap up. So the first question actually was one that I had written was, so we received in our poll that some individuals were noting that they work with refugees that were concerned with a relative that identified as LGBTQ+. So what could settlement workers do to help? Would they work directly with organizations such as yourself or local Rainbow Railroad or Rainbow Refugee organizations, or would they more recommend their clients to reach out to organizations such as yourself to assist?
Well, you have to understand a little bit of the client scenario. And so don't be afraid to try to understand a little bit more so you can make better decisions. Sometimes it does mean to find a local organization that works with LGBT people to provide those services. So for example, in Calgary, we're kind of known as the LGBT immigrant serving organization. And so we get tons of referrals from other places referring to us because people know that we have that expertise area. But we also know that isn't necessarily common across Canada. And so working outside of the immigrant serving sector is important as well. So for example, there's community organizations like 519 in Toronto that, have support groups and other services that you can probably access. In, smaller locations, such as Saskatoon, I know that there's support groups that you can and go toward. Also, I think if you look nationally, even if you're not in the same city, a lot of times people will work with whomever to mentor through a process as well. So there's different options that you can do for different scenarios. But first and foremost, ask what the client wants. That's really important. So, and ask the LGBT person, or get somebody to ask the LGBT person what they want and need as well. So one of the things you probably don't want to do is, try to, push people toward a service that they don't really want. And also working with the complexity of overseas LGBT people, especially people that are in countries that persecute LGBT people. You can do a lot of harm by trying to be good and reach out and email them and try to provide services from afar. You really have to understand what is acceptable. We've had lots of scenarios internationally where, you know, they want to be very discreet. They don't want emails going back and forth mentioning LGBT issues, because if somebody gets a hold of those emails, then what happens is you potentially could put somebody at risk. So that means you may need to phone them directly overseas. You may need to, you know, talk to a third person in the country of origin that is in a safe area, that type of thing. And each scenario is a little bit different. So as I said, but you got to get to know, you know, first and foremost, what's going on with that particular person.
Of course, thank you. One of the other questions we have is, do you have any tips about how to be an effective witness in the refugee hearings?
First and foremost, focus on your own credibility. So the IRB will be looking for that first and foremost. They'll look for the client as a witness. They view the client as a witness. So what you want to do with your particular client is absolutely talk openly about credibility, and absolutely ensuring that they are credible as a witness going in, and so are you. So you never want to say anything in a hearing that you cannot substantiate. So you never want to go into a hearing being unprepared and not knowing in depthly that client case. You are not a lawyer. I am not a lawyer, and we've never gone into a hearing identifying ourselves having any legal expertise whatsoever. But what you can do is absolutely ensure that what you are saying is true and, to the best of your knowledge, credible. The other thing that you can do is coach people through hearing questions. So if you've been to a few hearings, you'll understand very quickly the types of questions that arise. And what you can do is coach people through the whole process and have them practice some of the questions so that they're familiar going in. They're not feeling afraid going in. Very often when people are unprepared going in and afraid, they'll fumble around and or they'll be inconsistent with their answers. Depending on the scenarios that they're having to describe, a lot of inconsistencies often may come up. So it's those little inconsistencies that IRB is looking for, and it's based on those inconsistencies that they'll get rejected. So.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. So this one is, what are culturally appropriate services available for Muslim individuals that identify as LGBTQ+?
There are different ones in different cities across the country. So very often we get that question as well. And so, for example, and it isn't just for Muslim people or Islamic people, but also other religions as well. Often there are affirming services or affirming organizations or affirming mosques and churches that you can go to. So for example, there is an affirming service provider that provides services that exist here in Calgary that we can refer people to. They try to keep under the radar because they don't want to be attacked publicly, okay? And that unfortunately is the nature of what we're working with in Canada today. There's still a lot of discrimination out there. So you have to look more locally for those particular services. And where that doesn't exist, again, you can try to mentor that more on a national level and find people and organizations that can be affirming from other places as well. So given Zoom, given electronic communication, that very often has to occur this way. So.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. And just based off of the time, we don't have any further time for questions, but we will be posting them onto the meeting place on the N4 platform. So before I wrap up, is there any final words that you'd like to add, Kelly?
No, maybe just follow us with respect to the guidelines project over the next few years, because I think a lot of learning that people have had nationally will be disseminated through that project. I don't consider ourselves to be the affinitive expert. There's experts all over the country, and so use that expertise where you can. So.
Thank you. And we will be sure to post the details on the project as well onto our resource toolkit to share with our members as well. So thank you very much to our speaker. Thank you very much, Kelly, for taking time to present in today's webinar. And many thanks to you, the audience, for joining us today. You're very welcome to join us again. Oh, yeah, I'm sharing. Okay, good. You're very welcome to join us again for our upcoming events, including on July 14th, we have our Interpersonal Communications Part 2 webinar. And on July 21st, we'll be looking at Canada's immigrant determinant system. And also for those that are interested in the aspects related to temporary migrant workers, we will be having a panel discussion later in August on that. So following today's presentation, you'll be invited to complete a survey to share your feedback with N4. These surveys help us continuously improve and seek out new webinar content and opportunities that are responsive to topics you're interested in. We kindly ask that you follow the link and complete this brief survey. If you missed any part of today's presentation or would like to watch this session again, we'll be posting this recording to the N4 platform within the next week. We'll also be working with Kelly to answer any of the questions that were unable to be answered from this webinar for up to 10 days following the webinar in the meeting place on the N4 platform as well. Along with that, we will be sharing some relevant resources when we send out the recording email. So if you have not, please sign up to newcomernavigation.ca for access to our many resources, webinars, and our meeting place, among many other resources for yourselves. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you online again at a future N4 event. Take care.